ABC General Hospital spoilers for Thursday. February 5 revealed that Kai had hoped that finally telling Trina everything would calm the storm building between them. But the moment the truth left his lips, a new kind of danger began to coil around them both, tightening with every breath they took. He explained the late-night meetings with Nina, the cryptic warnings she had given him, the sense that she was pulling him into a world he never meant to enter, but each word only deepened the shadows in Trina's eyes. Kai tried to make her understand that he never sought out the secrets Nina carried, that he was dragged into them by accident, by guilt, by fear of what she might do if he refused to listen. Yet the more he spoke, the clearer it became that Nina's influence had seeped into their lives in a way neither of them could undo. The interactions between Kai and Nina were no longer harmless exchanges. They had become sparks falling into an Aeon, already dry forest threatening to ignite a fire neither he nor Trina could control. Trina felt the shift immediately the way Nina lingered in Kai's words, the way her presence seemed to follow him even when she wasn't physically there, the way Kai's voice trembled when he described the pressure Nina had placed on him to keep her secrets. It wasn't jealousy that hurt her. It was the realization that Kai had been carrying a burden alone, letting fear carve distance between them until the silence became its own kind of betrayal. Kai reached for her, desperate to repair what had begun to fracture, but the tension between them pulsed like something alive, fed by weeks of unspoken doubts and the haunting suspicion that Nina's chaos had woven itself into the fabric of their relationship. Trina could feel their love bending beneath the weight of forces they never asked to confront, forces that threatened to twist their future into something unrecognizable. Kai insisted that telling her the truth was his attempt to take control again, to stop Nina from manipulating them both. But Trina could sense that the story wasn't finished, that there were still pieces Kai hadn't allowed himself to say, dangers he couldn't yet name. And as they stood together, both shaken, both wounded by revelations neither had been prepared to face, it became painfully clear that this was no longer just a misunderstanding or a rough patch. This was a turning point, a fracture line running straight through the center of their bond. The love they had built was strong, but Nina had introduced a volatile element, a ticking threat hovering at the edges of every choice they made, and now Trina and Kai were being forced to confront the terrifying possibility that their relationship might not survive the adjustments they would need to make to move forward. Their hearts were still reaching for each other, but the danger surrounding them was rising fast. And for the first time, Trina wondered whether love would be enough to hold them together when the next wave of consequences arrived. Chase felt something inside him snap, a quiet but unmistakable fracture that echoed through every thought he tried to steady. It was one thing to be patient, another to trust the system. But watching Michael walk freely through Port Charles while suspicion swirled around him like smoke was a breaking point Chase could no longer ignore. He had always believed in order and process, in the idea that truth would eventually rise if he simply held the line. But now, as each hour passed with Michael untouched and unchallenged, Chase felt the foundations of that belief eroding beneath him. It wasn't jealousy or personal anger, it was the sickening sense that justice had slipped out of reach, that someone else was pulling strings he could not see. This loss of control awakened something sharp and dangerous inside him, something he had spent years suppressing. Chase began noticing details he once dismissed, reading motives into every word Michael spoke, every calm gesture, every calculated silence. The more he watched, the more he sensed a deeper threat growing beneath the surface. A gradual tightening of influence that made Chase feel like a piece in a game Michael had already mastered. This new awareness fed a relentless tension inside him, forcing him into a kind of emotional vigilance he had never inhabited before. Chase could feel himself changing, thinking more aggressively, questioning more boldly, pushing at boundaries he once respected without hesitation. He wasn't proud of the shift, but he couldn't stop it either. It felt like survival, like reclaiming power in a situation designed to strip it away from him. And as this internal recalibration grew stronger, so did the danger surrounding them. Something about Michael's serenity felt rehearsed, as if he knew more than he was saying, as if he expected the world to bend before him the way it always had. Chase felt the threat rising like a tide, slow, steady, unstoppable. Every instinct he possessed told him that whatever was building beneath the surface was not only dangerous, but Imina. The moment he realized this, Chase understood that the story had shifted from a simple investigation into something far more volatile, something that could explode without warning. And in that realization came the shock he could not shake. The true danger was no longer Michael's potential guilt. It was the growing darkness inside himself, the part of him willing to cross lines he once swore he would never touch. Chase wasn't just losing patience. He was losing the version of himself he recognized and in its place. Something far more unpredictable was beginning to take shape. Curtis turned to Alexis not because he wanted to, but because every other path in front of him had collapsed under the weight of the secret. He was now carrying one that tied Drew and Portia together in a way that was beginning to unravel his own sense of stability. What started as suspicion had become confirmation. and what became confirmation had twisted into a burden so heavy he could no longer trust himself to manage it alone. Alexis was the only person he believed could understand the legal, emotional, and moral lines he was now being forced to navigate. The only person sharp enough and steady enough to help him untangle the consequences of what he had discovered. Curtis explained the situation in fragments at first, the words catching in his throat as he tried to maintain control over emotions he had been keeping tightly caged. But the more he spoke, the clearer it became that he was undergoing a significant internal shift, an adjustment that had taken root the moment he realized the truth Drew was hiding in the quiet desperation in Portia's attempts to conceal it. This wasn't just a secret. It was a ticking bomb capable of dividing families, destroying trust, and rewriting relationships in Port Charles in a way no one was prepared for. Curtis felt trapped between loyalty and responsibility, between protecting the people he loved and exposing a truth that could devastate them. Alexis listened, her expression steady, even as the implications settled heavily between them. She could sense Curtis's turmoil, the way his voice stiffened each time he said Drew's name, the way his hands tightened when he spoke of Portia. Curtis wasn't just asking for advice, he was seeking absolution, clarity, and perhaps even permission to take the next step, whatever that might be. He admitted that his judgment had begun to warp under the pressure of holding on to something this explosive, that his sense of right and wrong had started to blur as he tried to decide whether revealing the secret would protect or destroy more lives. This new adjustment inside Curtis frightened him. He had always believed himself rational, grounded, someone who could weather emotional storms without losing the core of who he was. But now, the truth, Drew hid pulsed in his mind like a warning siren. Portia's fear clung to him like a shadow, and the more he tried to separate himself from the situation, the deeper he sank into it. He could feel his moral compass bending, recalibrating, reshaping itself as he tried to determine which future would be the lesser disaster. Alexis saw the danger immediately, not just in the secret itself, but in the psychological grip it had on Curtis. Every secret creates a shift, she reminded him, but the ones that bind multiple people together create something more volatile, a chain reaction. Curtis was standing in the center of one. If he took the wrong step, everything around him could fracture. Yet doing nothing would be just as devastating. The secret was alive now, breathing, tightening, influencing every interaction he had with Drew and Portia. Curtis admitted that he felt himself changing in ways he didn't recognize. His trust was cracking, his patience thinning, his anger simmering, and beneath it all, a dangerous thought had begun to whisper in his mind that perhaps he alone carried the power to decide how this story ended, that perhaps he could reshape the outcome before anyone else even realized there was something to fear. It was this realization that made Alexis lean forward, reminding him that such a mindset was the beginning of chaos. And Curtis knew she was right. The adjustment happening inside him wasn't linear or logical. It was emotional, unpredictable, bordering on reckless. If he didn't ground himself soon, the secret would consume him. What Curtis didn't yet understand, but Alexis did, was that this was only the beginning. The secret would not stay contained. The truth once discovered demands movement, demands revelation, demands consequences. And Curtis, now changed by the weight of what he knew, was standing at the brink of a decision that would shape not only his future, but Drew's, Portia's, and the fragile stability of everyone connected to them. A storm was coming, and Curtis had already stepped into its center. Michael turned to Carly and Sonny with the kind of heaviness that signaled the situation had already spiraled beyond anything he could manage alone. And as he summarized the accusations against him, accusations that painted him as the man who shot Drew, a new, unsettling tension began to coil through the room. Michael spoke quickly at first, outlining the investigation, the witness inconsistencies, the sudden shift in tone from the DA's office, and the growing suspicion that someone was deliberately redirecting the narrative toward him. But as he continued, the panic beneath his composure became clearer, revealing the truth. He didn't want to say aloud he was losing control. This was not just another legal complication. It was a targeted attack on his credibility, his family, and the life he had been trying desperately to rebuild. Sonny listened with the stillness of a man calculating every angle, every motive, every possible enemy who might benefit from Michael's downfall. And Carly, usually so forceful in her reactions, found herself frozen by the realization that the pressure around her son was not circumstantial, it was engineered. The more Michael explained, the more obvious it became that the accusations were not merely damaging, they were destabilizing him from the inside. He admitted with a voice that cracked just slightly that he felt trapped between defending himself and protecting his family, and that every move he made seemed to feed the narrative rather than weaken it. This sense of being cornered, of being manipulated by forces he couldn't yet identify, had begun to warp Michael's thinking, pushing him into a dangerous state where fear and logic collided. Sonny felt the shift immediately. Michael's words revealed a new mechanism of control, an unseen hand shaping the investigation, twisting public perception and using Drew's tragedy as a catalyst to target the Corinthos name. That realization ignited something fierce and volatile inside Sunny. A transformation from measured protector to strategic predator. Carly felt her own adjustment happening in real time. Her anger sharpened, her instincts activated, and her desperation to shield Michael grew into something almost feral. She had spent years fighting battles, but this one was different because it wasn't just about survival. It was about preventing the destruction of her son's identity, reputation, and future. The shock of the situation, the sheer insanity of how rapidly everything had escalated, left all three standing on the edge of a new reality. Michael was no longer navigating a problem, he was navigating an attack. Sunny and Carly were no longer reacting to danger, they were transforming under its weight, recalibrating themselves into versions, ready to defend, retaliate, and expose whoever had orchestrated this breach. And as the three of them absorbed the magnitude of what Michael revealed, one truth became undeniable. This was not the end of the nightmare, it was the beginning of a new war. One fueled by accusation manipulation, and the terrifying awareness that someone was controlling the board while the Corinthos family was still learning the rules. Drew stood frozen, the breath caught in his lungs as he finally saw Willow's behavior for what it truly was, not concern. Not fear, not protective instinct, but a calculated escalation of control aimed directly at him. At first, the little shifts had seemed harmless enough, the way she filtered who could see him. How she decided which updates were shared with the family, her subtle interference in his conversations with Scout, her insistence that certain topics were too stressful for him to handle. But now watching her unleash a new wave of aggressive decisions without warning. Drew understood with chilling clarity that Willow was no longer shielding him, she was corralling him. The attack wasn't physical, it came in the form of limits, restrictions, and boundaries she imposed as if he were incapable of managing his own life. She questioned his stability, rewrote his intentions, and stepped into decisions that were never hers to make, all while claiming she was trying to help. Drew felt something inside him twist painfully as he realized how deeply Willow's influence had wrapped itself around him during his recovery, shaping the narrative of his condition and controlling the people who had access to him. And now with her latest actions, she had crossed into territory that made him feel trapped, silenced, and dangerously powerless. Willow had convinced herself that she was preventing chaos. Yet she was the one creating it, pushing Drew's autonomy aside, isolating him from key people, and tightening her grip on every aspect of his life as if she alone had the right to dictate his future. The more he tried to understand her motivations, the more terrifying the picture became. Willow wasn't acting out of love. She was acting out of fear, and fear, when left unchecked, had transformed into obsession. This new attack, this surge of controlling behavior, marked the beginning of something far worse than tension in a household. It signaled the rise of a catastrophe neither of them could fully foresee. Drew could feel the warning pulsing in his chest if Willow continued down this path. If she kept tightening her control while convincing herself she was helping, the fallout would be devastating, splintering families, destroying trust, and turning every bond around them into collateral damage. For the first time since waking from his medical crisis, Drew felt a new kind of danger, not from his injuries, not from the world outside, but from Willow herself, and from the version of her that no one else had noticed until it was too late.